afternoon to every one of you. I'm Jackie from the Asian Energy Study Center. It's our great pleasure to welcome you once again for coming to this seminar. Some of you have been with us throughout this week and know that this is, I think, the fourth energy research events that we have been hosting in this week. So very happy to see you again here. And today we are going to have Mr. Smale from the Netherlands to give us a presentation on domestic energy consumption in perspective. And Mr. Smale is a PhD candidate with the Environmental Policy Group, Wagningen University in the Netherlands. Wabben studied environmental sciences in the university, specializing in environmental policy with a minor in development sociology at Lund University. So that's why he will nicely bring in the sociology perspective into this sort of energy consumption studies. And he is currently a PhD candidate at the Environmental Policy Group in his PhD study titled Emerging Energy Practices in the Smart Grid. Robin is trying to find out how smart grid innovations will change the daily life of ordinary households in Europe. Very interesting target group. How does the smart grid empower sustainable lifestyles and transform the way our energy system is organized? Now, we are very happy to have Robin with us in this week as our center's visiting research fellow. Extremely happy to have you with us. And he just gave a very great presentation on our Monday conference. I'm sure that he will do a very great job today in this presentation. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Robin.
Thank you, Daphne, for the kind words. As Daphne pointed out, indeed, my title is Energy Consumption in Perspective, but it will be about households, so domestic energy consumption particularly. So I have a presentation of about an hour, I think. I've got 31 slides prepared, so you can keep track in the bottom right corner. Includes also two videos, 5 minutes each or so. And I'm going to be making 3 main points. The first one will be that indeed domestic energy consumption matters. For grid management, for the sustainable energy transition. I will argue that there are different perspectives, really fundamentally different perspectives of understanding energy consumption. And thirdly, that the way we understand energy consumption also matters very much for the way we think that we can change energy behavior. So without further ado, I will get into it. Yes, there we go. So I'll first introduce a little bit of the context of energy consumption. And then I will pit against each other 2 dominant perspectives of understanding energy consumption. The first of which is conceiving energy users as individuals. Secondly, energy consumption as social practices. And then I will go in depth using my own experience in my PhD so far into the smart grid case study to see where these 2 different perspectives bring us in understanding energy consumption. And I will take that further to discuss some implications for policy and behavioral change. And then I will try to bring these 2 perspectives together and see if we can find some common ground and we can maybe figure out some ways in which we can use both approaches. And lastly, I will also add some international comparative perspective to complete the picture of indeed putting energy consumption into a broader perspective. So, to start, why do we care about domestic energy consumption? So it's been problematized in different ways in the past. In the early days of the grid, the focus was on getting people to buy more appliances, so to actually consume more, in order to justify further investment into the grid. Of course, this is far in the past now. It was also about consuming energy safely. By now, at least the last decades, energy has become more scarce, and the environmental impacts of energy consumption have been well established. So energy consumption was problematized as potentially at least wasteful, and indeed there were calls to conserve energy. So a lot of the focus was on convincing people to buy the right kind of light bulbs, for example, isolate homes, to turn off appliances, to cut down on standby consumption. And we've seen the advent of energy labels in time. And I think that now we are entering a new way, a new time of problematizing energy consumption. Now it is about the timing of use, so it's about the rhythm of energy that we use, rather than so much the quantity of it, it's about the quality of it. So I see that, I believe that scarcity is no longer the number one problem, but it's about the quality of renewable energy. It's about the peaks rather than the quantity. And I will build on that argument more in the later to come. But first, let's zoom out a little bit. So does energy consumption matter? I've prepared a bunch of graphs to sort of give some perspective on that. So we see that residential energy consumption, this is energy, not specifically electricity consumption, has sort of topped off and sort of peaked. This is in the US. We see that also in the UK, for example. I think this is a general trend in most industrialized countries. But if we look at that, so we have to split that apart as energy and electricity. So we see that indeed electricity consumption has still been rising actually, and we can partly explain that by the fact that our appliances have become much more efficient. You can see here that televisions, refrigerators, washing machines, all have become much more energy efficient. But this has not led to decreases in electricity use. In fact, actually, electricity consumption has gone up as the amount of appliances in households has risen and continues to rise. I mean, the amount of televisions, ICT, all these appliances continues to go up, even though so the benefits of increased efficiency of the appliances is greatly offset by the amount of extra appliances that each household has. Another way in which domestic energy consumption matters is the rhythm of it, as I just mentioned. So peak demand is most concerning to grid operators because it necessitates the switching on of the most polluting and the most expensive generation. And also high peaks mean that we have to invest in strong cabling and it's very expensive in general. So this also means that in the future domestic energy consumption will continue to matter a lot because plugging in one electric vehicle is equal to suddenly connecting one to three extra households. So you can imagine this peak being 3 times as high and also much more sharp because as soon as you plug it in, of course, it goes up much more. So these are all reasons why we should care indeed about energy consumption. And it's not just about the energy value of households, it's also about the behavior. In fact, energy use of identical apartments can differ 300 to 400% based on the behavior of the actual people. So this is a sort of justification as to why we indeed should care about what people do with energy. Now, beyond that, there's also a bigger picture of sustainable behavior. So fostering sustainable energy consumption behavior is also important because it's part of a bigger transition. Transition towards governance and distributed responsibility for the environment. There is spillover effects as well. If people care about energy, they may also care about waste, for example, or water conservation. And it may also be part of what we call, my faculty, ecological modernization. So of which governance is also a part. And in the future we may predict, I mean there are of course varying interpretations and ideas about this. We may expect rising energy prices, energy mobility, electric mobility will become more and more prominent. There will be more heat pumps, more distributed energy generation. A lot of them involve indeed the active behavior of consumers, which is why we indeed care about energy consumption. So caring about energy consumption is something contrary to optimization. So the idea that indeed energy consumption should be sort of responsible, should be ecologically modernized, that householders should care about consumption is maybe contrary to automation because you can also, of course, behind the back of consumers increase the sustainability of consumption. And then many behavioral changes might not be necessary. But this sort of automation versus behavioral change argument always comes back. But it is also a fairly unnuanced debate because certain aspects of energy consumption can be automized very successfully, other parts maybe not. So if you see this debate, you can keep in your head that maybe this debate needs some nuance. So I mentioned at the start that I'm going to be pitting two perspectives against each other. And these will be attitude behavioral models with situated approaches to energy consumption. Specifically, energy users as individuals and energy consumption as shared practices. The energy users as individuals approach is used in social psychology and economic models, and we've got practice theory on the other hand. If we were to sort of look at that from a social science perspective, then we can see that understanding behavior can be more on the agency side and more on the structure side. If we sort of, this is hard to do of course, but if we put attitude behavioral models towards the agency side of things, then the practices approaches will be more on the structural perspective. Key authors in the practice theory field are, for example, Elizabeth Shove. She's more on the structural side. My own supervisor, as well as, for example, Anthony Giddens, they are a little bit more towards the agency side. And then we've got Bourdieu is even more far on the structural side. And we also have rational actor models, which sort of argue that behavior is linked to the strategic planning, sort of planned behavior. I will talk a little bit less about that, but it will come back at some point as well. So I'm not an expert on social psychology by any means, but just to paint a picture, what the social psychological tradition will say is that behavior is dependent on people's attitudes, the subjective norms and perceived behavioral control. Together this forms an intent to action, and this intent to action can be translated into behavior, but not necessarily. So there might be barriers that block people's intention to act, and these barriers can be taken away, for example. Now, typical studies in this tradition are, let's say, large end studies, so you need to interview a lot of households, survey a lot of households, and of course a statistical analysis is an important part of this. Now, just to give an example, on Monday we had a presentation by Dr. Park from Smale. He used a technology acceptance model, so you have many different sort of values or attitudes that together form a model with which you can predict people's actions. So that's sort of the basic idea. And by using of regression analysis, you can identify the key barriers and attitudes, knowledges, and demographics that block desired behavior. Oftentimes, these kind of studies, they result in sort of segmentations. So we can split apart the Dutch population in terms of their attitudes towards energy innovation. So some people are front runners, so they like to incorporate these new energy innovations into their daily lives. Some people are very much opponents, some people are more pragmatic. A common outcome of these social psychological studies is a segmentation of the study population. Now, this is in contrast to energy consumption as shared practices. So I will give a brief introduction to practice theory here, as well as I can. So the idea is that it's not about people, but it's about practices. In fact, people are just carriers of practices. And practices, they have histories, rhythms, rationales, goals and emotions, meanings, rules, none of which are situated at the individual level, but they are rather contextual, they are shared, they have historical context. And I will bring it alive a bit more in a minute. But the major definition, I think the definition is important, is that a practice is a routinized type of behavior which consists of several elements interconnected to one another. Forms of bodily activities, forms of mental activities, things and their use, background knowledge in the form of understanding, know-how, states of emotion and motivational knowledge, a lot of things connected to each other. And then practices are like blocks, relatively enduring, self-stabilizing patterns whose elements seem to be sort of gluing together. An important difference between practice theory and sort of the social psychological tradition is that practice theory is also an ontology, a philosophy, and an epistemology. So that may be a little bit abstract, but one example is, for example, grocery shopping. So how do we understand grocery shopping? In the practice theory tradition, intuition might say that, okay, if you want to understand grocery shopping, you will stand outside the supermarket and you will survey people, you will ask them, why did you buy certain things? In the practices tradition, you will instead say that people's behavior is dependent on the infrastructures of consumption that enable or disable certain kinds of behavior. So instead, you're going to be shadowing consumers, for example. You're going to be looking at what kind of rules, what kind of technologies exist that block people's action in certain ways. So that's a non-individual approach. So if we apply this to energy consumption, we can identify certain practices here. I mean, there's showering, there's heating, there's paying the electricity bill, there's washing machine, using the washing machine, for example. And the basic idea is that people don't consume energy. People don't consume energy. They use energy to perform daily activities. And this energy consumption is often routinized behavior, it's contextual, situated, non-rational behavior, which oftentimes leads to an attitude-behavioral gap, because people might care a lot about energy but still use a lot of energy because that's simply the routines, the practices that they have adopted. So we identify sort of different energy management practices, so practices or types of behavior which are directly involving energy, such as paying your electricity bill, and those that just consume energy, for example, watching television. I mean, people can watch television without considering the energy that they're consuming at some point. That makes sense, of course. And the way to do energy studies with the practices model is to really use a mix of methods. So we've got ethnography, participation, observation, and people are just informants of practices. So we can interview them, we can survey them, but the questions have to be very different. Otherwise, we sort of unintentionally still use the attitude behavioral model. So this is a model that I use in my own PhD project now. So we see here energy practices that are influenced by system actors and the system of provision. And there's a sort of circular process going on. So we've got the behaviors that are dependent on the system, and the system also responds to the behavior of people. So this is these sort of elements that are introduced into behaviors, they may be mediated by intermediary organizations. So for example, system actors such as the utility companies, they can approach an intermediary organization such as an energy collective. And these energy collectives, they approach people, so their energy practices, and then at the same time, people can also organize in, for example, consumer organizations, an intermediary organization, and try to lobby for changes at the system level. So there is organizations in between the system and the behavior. Now I'm going to try to make this a little bit more concrete by taking the case study of the smart grid as example. So I assume that a lot of you know a lot of details about the smart grid already, but just a quick introduction. So in the smart grid, energy consumption is of renewed importance because the ICT upgrade that the smart grid is offers new opportunities to boost sustainable behavior, and that ranges from the grid co-management, so consumers sort of help manage the grid, to more electric vehicle mobility, and to further incentivizing decentralized renewable energy generation. For example, because there is this ICT, people have direct insight into what they are consuming, to what they are producing. I mean, if you don't know what your solar panels are producing, you may be less motivated to buy solar panels, right? So that's also the idea why energy behavior is of continued and renewed importance in the smart grid. And I like to use this infographic to sort of explain what kind of behaviors we are expecting to emerge in the smart grid. So more timing of use, so as a response to dynamic pricing, people will try to shift their energy behavior to times when energy is abundant. For example, the sun is shining. People will monitor their energy more. Energy also becomes perhaps more a social topic, so energy is visible again. Energy now is, of course, fairly invisible, but in the smart grid, energy will become visible as a social topic. And there's mobility and energy storage practices involved as well. And there are some in literature, and also the utility companies have some sort of problems in mind when it comes to sort of the participation of people in smart grid. So how can residents be involved in the long term? A lot of people become disinterested in energy over longer time. That's a problem. How flexible are really people's behaviors? Smart energy systems may also be not so inclusive because not everyone is equally capable of sort of understanding all these new ICT technologies, etc. There's many problems that come with the consumer side of smart grids. Yeah, and also I think it's valuable to have a look at this from my colleague. This is the key sort of energy management practices that are important in the smart grid are indeed the monitoring of energy consumption, generation of renewable energy, and the time shifting of energy use. And we can organize that at a private level. So we've got all of that in the household itself. We can also organize it horizontally, so among different households that work together. And we can organize it vertically, so then the utility company plays a bigger role. For example, in time shifting of energy use, then you have direct demand control. So you have utilities directly switching off washing machines, for example. So these are different ways of organizing this. And the way in which in the smart grid different kinds of behavior will be organized, that's not set yet. I mean, these different models are being tested in pilot projects in the Netherlands right now. So now I'm going to show you 2 videos. I think it will be quite fun. They were made in the UK, in Nottingham. They were created in 2011 as part of the Desimax project and Horizon's Smart Living Research Program. And they look into the sociological and psychological dimensions of near-future smart grid technologies. And they use different disciplines. They brainstorm together. Some more technologists, design people, all came together to sort of fantasize about what daily life will look like in the smart grid. They made videos of a family, a student house, and a young couple responding to these new technologies. And they painted a dream scenario and a nightmare scenario. And I think this will sort of trigger our fantasy about what it will be like, indeed, to live in 10 years from now in this sort of smart grid future. So, yeah, let's play those. I will start with the, let's say, the dream scenario.
Terry and June Electron have been married 20 years and have a 16-year-old son, Ben. The family live in the Middle Shadows, in a small detached house complete with recently installed solar PV panels, which will, thanks to the feed-in tariff, make them a tiny profit over the next 25 years. The panels were June's idea. She feels guilty enough about her own lifestyle without having dead polar bears on her conscience. So she's declared war on the family's energy use. Another of June's measures is the Energy Sure shower limiter, which restricts each shower to 10p. This has so far been plenty for everyone. In fact, Terry and Ben have been competing to see who can have the quickest shower, Ben being in the lead so far. June has also found this helps to get them up and out in the mornings, having to stop Ben being late for school again. One of the key reasons Terry agrees to June's changes is that the cost of energy has gone up another 20% this winter. The changes have helped them all to be more considerate of what they are using, and in fact, June herself has switched to washing her hair in the evening where it costs cheaper. This also allows her to spend longer drying her hair at a cheaper rate of electricity. And she started to use this time to pamper herself a bit more and paint her nails, which she never had time to do when she got ready in the morning. Terry checks the smart meter display over breakfast and is chuffed to see that they are still in the green, indicating that they have stayed within their usage limit for the morning. The Smart Switch online service saves them money by switching their supplier on a regular basis, using real-time pricing information. It sounded great when Terry signed up, but he really starts to appreciate the benefits when the morning news headlines declare further energy price hikes. And his colleagues at work complain that they can't keep up with which supplier currently has the best deal. He recommends Smart Switch to them, and secretly hopes that they do sign up, so that he gets the 50 quid shopping voucher that the company provides for recommend a friend. Christmas could be all sorted. According to the smart meter, the best time to do the washing is early afternoon or between midnight and 6 AM. This isn't a problem for the family though, as June works from home 3 days a week and likes to get through it when everybody else is out of the house. This means she can usually get it hung up outside if it's a nice day, and she loves the smell of line-dried washing and often gets the chance to take a break in the afternoon sunshine. Terry particularly appreciates the new energy system. To him, he's managed to get rid of a whole set of responsibilities. He still checks the bills when they come in, and the extra information and monitoring means it's easy to see when the energy is being used. the fact that the whole system's automated means he can relax and let it organise itself. As long as they stay within their limits, he doesn't need to think about it. He also worries less about things breaking down or being left on accidentally, as the system monitors everything and warns him when things are wrong. Last week, the family bought a new freezer, selecting a model chosen for them by Smart Switch. It doesn't have an ice machine like Ben wanted, but he was easily appeased with the crazy ice cube molds. They all like the shiny new high-tech appeal of the model that they received, and its impressive energy-saving features, like whirring into action if the door has been left open for any amount of time. This comes in handy when, against Dad's better judgment, Ben decides to see if he can climb in. One thing Terry was particularly pleased about was the decision to have solar panels installed on their roof. The Watts next door recently installed a wind turbine, and whilst, by all accounts, it was making them a decent return on their investment, Terry preferred the way the solar panels looked on his house. He liked that his wife and Carol Watt next door seemed to be getting closer, as they gossiped and compared notes about their respective energy generation devices. He and John Watts were more than happy to pass the time teasing each other over how their energy systems were definitely better than the others. Both families agreed, however, that they were clearly the greenest street in the Middleshires and the most desirable place to live.
So this doesn't sound too bad, right?
Very interesting.
It helps. It's a social tool. People get together. Neighbors are more friendly, more social. It doesn't lead to any conflicts. And here, a quite different picture will be painted.
Terry and June Electron have been married 20 years and have a 16-year-old son, Ben. The family live in the Middleshires, in a small detached house, complete with recently installed solar PV panels, which are supposed to make them a profit sometime over the next 25 years. The panels were June's idea, but she feels guilty enough about her own lifestyle without having dead polar bears on her conscience, so she's declared war on the family's energy use. It's as a result of another of June's measures that at 7:30 in the morning, Terry is heard swearing loudly at the shower for being too bloody cold. The Energy Shore shower limiter restricts each shower to 10p, good for 8 minutes in the summer, but considerably less on this November morning. Ben isn't sure why his dad hasn't figured out yet that flicking the shower fuse on and off resets the system, but he's not sharing his knowledge in case his mum finds out and bans his 20-minute showers. The only reason Terry agrees to June's changes is that the cost of energy has gone up another 20% this winter. But watching his skin turn blue in the shower right now, that seems less of an issue. He checks the smart meter display to reassure himself that the sacrifice is all worthwhile, but it's glowing a menacing red, meaning they're outside their usage limit for the morning and being charged at double the normal rate. When over breakfast, June complains that her use of the hairdryer during peak morning loads has prompted the excess charge. Terry doesn't know whether to be delighted that the new regime is spoiling her day too, or cheesed up that the energy company is squeezing even more money out of them. He chooses the latter, as it suits his mood this morning better. The Smart Switch online service they signed up to is supposed to save them money by switching their supplier on a regular basis using real-time pricing information. It sounded great when Terry signed them up, but it seems as though the software agent choosing the best plan for them